They called me the coffee girl. Not to my face, of course, but I heard the whispers in the hallway. I saw the smirks when I walked into meetings with my notepad, ready to take minutes that no one would ever read. I was Captain Sarah Mitchell, decorated Air Force veteran with 2 tours in Afghanistan, but in the gleaming towers of Morrison and Associates, I was just another woman in a cheap blazer, fetching documents and scheduling meetings for men who couldn't be bothered to learn my name. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 years ago, I was commanding a squadron of fighter pilots over hostile territory. Now, I couldn't command enough respect to get my own parking spot. "Sarah, can you grab us some coffee?" Marcus Williams called out during the Monday morning briefing, not even looking up from his phone. The other executives chuckled. It was always the same joke, the same dismissive tone, the same assumption that my military experience meant nothing in their world of spreadsheets and profit margins. I had applied for the Strategic Operations Manager position, a role that should have been perfect for someone with my background in tactical planning and crisis management. Instead, they gave it to Derek Thompson, a Harvard MBA with 0 real-world leadership experience and a habit of taking credit for other people's ideas. "Coming right up," I said with a smile that felt like swallowing glass. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I was watching, learning, preparing. The company was hemorrhaging money on the Blackstone defense contract, and I could see exactly why. Having spent years coordinating military logistics, I recognized the inefficiencies immediately. The timeline was impossible, the resource allocation was backwards, and the communication chain was a disaster waiting to happen. But when I tried to voice my concerns during strategy meetings, I was met with patronizing smiles and dismissive waves. "That's above your pay grade, Sarah," Derek would say, adjusting his designer tie. "Why don't you focus on making sure the conference room is set up for our next client meeting?" 6 months. 6 months of being invisible, of watching a multi-million-dollar contract spiral toward catastrophe, while grown men played politics and protected their egos. I kept detailed notes anyway. Every missed deadline, every communication breakdown, every critical error that could have been prevented. My military training had taught me that preparation saves lives, and in the corporate world, it could save careers. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday in November. The quarterly board meeting was supposed to be Derek's moment of triumph. For weeks, he had been bragging about his revolutionary approach to the Blackstone project, promising results that would secure his promotion to senior vice president. I sat in the back corner, invisible as always, watching as he presented slide after slide of optimistic projections and strategic buzzwords that meant nothing. "As you can see," Derek said, clicking to his final slide, "our innovative approach has positioned us for unprecedented success with Blackstone Defense. I'm confident we'll not only meet our deadlines but exceed expectations." The room buzzed with impressed murmurs. Board members nodded approvingly. CEO Robert Morrison himself smiled and began to speak about Derek's visionary leadership. That's when Derek's phone buzzed, then buzzed again. His confident smile faltered as he glanced at the screen. The color drained from his face. "I'm sorry," he stammered. "I need to take this call." But it was too late. The conference room door burst open, and Colonel James Blackstone himself stormed in, his military bearing unmistakable even in civilian clothes. "Which one of you geniuses thought it was a good idea to send our classified defense specifications to the wrong contractor?" His voice could have cut steel. "Because congratulations, you've just created a national security incident." The room went dead silent. Derek's phone clattered to the floor. There must be some mistake. "The mistake," Colonel Blackstone continued, "was trusting amateurs with a defense contract. We've had to halt the entire project. Your company has exactly 48 hours to explain how this happened, or you're facing federal investigation." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "And whoever designed your communication protocol should consider a career change. It's the most incompetent system I've seen in 30 years of military service." The door slammed. The boardroom erupted in chaos. "How did this happen?" Morrison's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Derek stood frozen, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The team, we followed all protocols." "What protocols?" Board member Janet Harrison snapped. "You assured us everything was under control." That's when it happened. The moment that would change everything. From my corner, barely audible above the chaos, I spoke. "Actually, I documented several critical communication failures 3 months ago." The room went silent. Every head turned toward me. Derek's face went white. "Sarah, this isn't the time. I have detailed reports on every security breach in the system," I continued, standing up slowly, including the one that led to this incident. Morrison's eyes locked onto mine. Reports? My heart hammered, but my voice stayed steady. Years of briefing commanding officers under pressure had prepared me for this moment. "Yes, sir. I've been tracking system vulnerabilities and communication gaps since I started here. I tried to raise these concerns through proper channels, but they were dismissed." Dismissed by whom? Morrison's tone was dangerous. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Derek looked like he might be sick. "By the strategic operations manager," I said quietly. What happened next was exactly what I'd been trained for in the military. Rapid deployment under pressure. Morrison's assistant rushed to set up my laptop in the conference room. Board members leaned forward as I opened file after file of documentation. Screenshots, email chains, security audit reports, timeline analyses. On September 15th, I began, my voice clear and professional. I identified a critical vulnerability in our client data routing system. I sent a memo to Derek Thompson outlining the risks and recommending immediate protocol changes. Derek shifted uncomfortably. "I don't recall." His response was that security concerns were above my pay grade. I continued, clicking to the next slide that showed Derek's actual email reply. On October 3rd, I documented the first minor breach. Client files from Patterson Industries were accidentally copied to Morrison's shared drive. Again, I reported this. The room was utterly silent, except for the soft click of my presentation advancing. October 20th, another breach. November 1st, a major vulnerability that I warned could lead to classified information being misdirected. Each slide showed meticulous documentation, timestamps, and Derek's dismissive responses. "And yesterday," I said, pulling up the final slide, "I predicted this exact scenario in a risk assessment report that was never reviewed." Morrison stared at the screen showing my detailed analysis titled, "Critical Security Failure. Blackstone Project at Risk. Immediate Action Required." The timestamp showed it was written 5 days ago. "You predicted this?" Board member Harrison asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, ma'am. Based on the pattern of communication failures and security gaps I'd been tracking. The misdirection of classified files to an unauthorized contractor was the logical endpoint of the system failures I'd been reporting." Colonel Blackstone, who had quietly returned during my presentation, stepped forward. "Captain Mitchell?" My spine straightened automatically. "Yes, sir. Captain Sarah Mitchell, 82nd Airborne, Strategic Operations Division." "Yes, sir." He nodded slowly. "Your service record crossed my desk during the initial contractor vetting. I wondered why a decorated Air Force strategist was working as an administrative assistant. The boardroom was so quiet you could hear hearts beating." Morrison stood up slowly. "Derek, you're suspended pending investigation. Sarah." He paused, and for the first time since I'd started working there, really looked at me. "I need to see you in my office. Now." Morrison's corner office felt different when you weren't invisible. The city sprawled below us through floor-to-ceiling windows, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged in that view. "Tell me about your military background," Morrison said, settling behind his massive desk. 2 tours in Afghanistan. Specialized in tactical communications and strategic planning. Led a team responsible for coordinating multi-branch operations in hostile territory. Received commendations for crisis management and innovative problem-solving under pressure. "And you've been working as my assistant's assistant?" "Yes, sir." He shook his head. "Whose brilliant idea was that?" "I applied for the strategic operations manager position. HR said my military experience wasn't transferable to corporate culture." Morrison's jaw tightened. "The same position we gave to Thompson." "Yes, sir." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "The Blackstone contract is worth $47 million. If we lose it, we're looking at layoffs, potential bankruptcy. The board is considering selling the company." I waited. "How long would it take you to fix this?" The question I'd been preparing for since the day I walked into this building. With full authority and access to the technical team, 72 hours to stabilize the security protocols and re-establish communication with Blackstone. 2 weeks to completely overhaul the system and prevent future incidents. "And you're confident you can do this?" I thought about the men I'd commanded in combat zones, the split-second decisions that meant life or death, the responsibility of protecting others when failure wasn't an option. "Yes, sir." I'm confident. Morrison picked up his phone. Janet, call an emergency board meeting for this afternoon and get Derek's office cleared out. We have a new strategic operations manager. The next 72 hours were unlike anything I'd experienced since active duty. Morrison gave me a team of 12, full access to all systems, and complete authority to make whatever changes were necessary. The skeptical looks from the tech team evaporated within hours as I dismantled and rebuilt their security systems. How did you know to isolate the tertiary backup servers? Asked Kevin Chen, the head of IT, at 2 a.m. on Friday night. Same principle as securing communication lines in a combat zone, I replied, not looking up from the code I was reviewing. You identify every possible point of failure and build redundancies for your redundancies. By Saturday morning, we had restored secure communication with Blackstone Defense. By Sunday evening, I was personally briefing Colonel Blackstone on our enhanced security protocols. Outstanding work, Captain, he said after my presentation. This is the level of professionalism we expect from defense contractors. The relief in Morrison's eyes was visible from across the conference room, but the real test came Monday morning. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. The entire company, over 200 employees, packed into the main conference room and overflow areas. Rumors had been flying all weekend about layoffs, closures, and corporate restructuring. I stood at the back, wearing the same professional blazer I'd worn every day for 6 months. But something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't invisible anymore. Morrison took the podium, his expression grave. This weekend, our company faced a crisis that threatened our largest contract and potentially our entire future. Nervous murmurs rippled through the crowd. For months, critical security vulnerabilities in our systems went unaddressed, despite repeated warnings from one of our employees. These vulnerabilities led to a security breach that nearly cost us our relationship with Blackstone Defense. The murmurs grew louder. I saw Derek in the crowd, his face pale and drawn. However, Morrison continued, the same employee who identified these problems also provided the solution. Working around the clock this weekend, she rebuilt our entire security system and saved the Blackstone contract. He paused, scanning the room until his eyes found mine. Sarah Mitchell, would you please come to the front? The crowd parted as I walked down the center aisle. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, hear the whispered recognition from colleagues who had barely acknowledged my existence for half a year. For those who don't know, Morrison said as I reached the podium, Sarah is a decorated Air Force veteran with extensive experience in strategic operations and crisis management. Skills that, frankly, we were too blind to recognize. He turned to me. Sarah, would you mind sharing your background with the team? I took the microphone, looked out at the sea of faces, some shocked, some embarrassed, some impressed, and began to speak. 6 months ago, I applied for a position that matched my military experience. I was told that commanding fighter pilots and coordinating multi-million-dollar defense operations wasn't relevant to corporate strategy. A few uncomfortable laughs. So I took an administrative role, thinking I could prove my value over time. I paused, finding Derek in the crowd. His eyes were fixed on the floor. What I discovered was a company with incredible potential being held back by communication failures and security gaps that, in a military context, would be considered catastrophic. The room was absolutely silent. This weekend, we faced the corporate equivalent of enemy fire. And just like in Afghanistan, the solution wasn't panic or blame. It was rapid assessment, strategic thinking, and flawless execution under pressure. Morrison stepped forward, which is why I'm announcing that Sarah Mitchell is our new Senior Vice President of Strategic Operations, effective immediately. The silence broke into scattered applause that grew louder and more enthusiastic as the reality sank in. If you've ever been called just another anything, write I deserve recognition in the comments, because you absolutely do. My first day as Senior Vice President started with Derek cleaning out his office. You set me up, he said quietly, as he packed his diplomas and awards into a cardboard box. No, I replied, watching him from the doorway. I documented the problems you ignored and offered solutions you dismissed. You set yourself up. He looked up, his face a mixture of anger and defeat. You think this changes anything? You think they actually respect you now? I think results speak louder than assumptions, I said. And right now, the results show that the coffee girl just saved their $47 million contract. He shouldered his box and walked past me. This won't last. They'll find a reason to get rid of you. Maybe, I agreed, but it won't be because I wasn't qualified. The changes came quickly after that. Morrison instituted new hiring practices that prioritized competence over pedigree. The toxic culture of dismissiveness and casual sexism began to shift as results became the only currency that mattered. I restructured the entire operations department, bringing in 2 other veterans, Maria Santos, former Navy logistics coordinator, and James Park, ex-Army intelligence analyst. Together we transformed Morrison and Associates from a company bleeding money on failed projects to one of the most efficient firms in the industry. The Blackstone contract, which had been 60% behind schedule when I took over, was completed 2 weeks early and $3.2 million under budget. But the moment that truly changed everything happened 6 months later, during the annual industry conference. The ballroom at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel was packed with the most powerful people in defense contracting. CEOs, government officials, military brass. Everyone who mattered in our industry was there. I was scheduled to give a presentation on innovative security protocols in defense contracting, a topic I could discuss in my sleep, but still nerve-wracking given the audience. As I waited backstage, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. Morrison's letting some secretary give a keynote. The voice belonged to Richard Caldwell, CEO of our biggest competitor. What's next? Having the janitor discuss fiscal policy. Laughter followed. I heard she used to be in the military or something. Probably thinks PowerPoint presentations are like battle plans. More laughter. Well, this should be entertaining. Nothing like watching amateur hour at a professional conference. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. In Afghanistan, moments before dangerous missions, I would do the same thing. Center myself, remember my training, and focus on the mission objective. The mission tonight wasn't survival, it was respect. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sarah Mitchell, Senior Vice President of Strategic Operations at Morrison & Associates. The applause was polite but lukewarm as I walked onto the stage. I could see Caldwell in the front row, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. 3 years ago, I began, I was responsible for coordinating supply lines and communication protocols for joint task force operations in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. The room quieted. The margin for error was 0. A single communication failure could mean the difference between successful missions and body bags coming home. I clicked to my first slide. Not a corporate chart, but a map of Afghanistan with operational zones marked. Today, I want to talk about why the same principles that keep soldiers alive in combat zones are revolutionizing how we approach defense contracting. For the next 30 minutes, I walked that audience through case studies that connected military precision to corporate success. I showed them how the communication protocols I'd developed in the field had prevented the Blackstone crisis, how tactical thinking had saved Morrison & Associates millions of dollars, how military-trained strategic planning was reshaping our industry. The room was transfixed. In conclusion, I said, clicking to my final slide, the future of defense contracting isn't about who has the fanciest MBA or the most expensive suit. It's about who understands that in high-stakes environments, competence isn't negotiable. The silence lasted for 3 heartbeats. Then the applause began. Not polite, professional clapping, but the kind of thunderous recognition usually reserved for standing ovations at award shows. If you're tired of being underestimated, leave a strong arm emoji in the comments, because your moment is coming too. As I walked off stage, I passed Caldwell's table. He was no longer smirking. The conference presentation changed everything, not just for me, but for the entire industry. Within a month, 3 major defense contractors had reached out to Morrison & Associates, specifically requesting to work with our military integrated approach. Our revenue doubled, then tripled. Morrison promoted me to executive vice president and gave me equity in the company. But more importantly, he gave me the authority to reshape how we recruited and valued talent. I want you to build something, he told me during one of our weekly strategy meetings, a program that identifies and develops military veterans transitioning to corporate careers. We missed out on your talent for 6 months because we didn't know how to recognize it. The Veterans Leadership Initiative launched 6 months later. We partnered with transition assistance programs at military bases across the country, creating pathways for retiring service members to apply their skills in corporate environments. Maria Santos became our director of logistics. James Park headed up our new Intelligence and Risk Assessment Division. Captain Robert Klein, recently retired from the Marines, took over our international operations. Within 2 years, Morrison & Associates had gone from a struggling mid-tier contractor to the premier defense consulting firm on the East Coast. But the sweetest moment came during our 3rd annual company retreat. The ballroom at the Four Seasons was elegant in its simplicity. White linens, soft lighting, and an audience of industry leaders who had come to hear about our revolutionary approach to defense contracting. I stood at the podium, wearing a navy blue dress that commanded attention rather than blending into the background. Below me, an audience of over 300 people. CEOs, government officials, board members, and employees waited for my keynote address. 5 years ago, I began. I walked into Morrison & Associates as an invisible woman. I was a decorated military officer who couldn't get a parking spot, a strategic planner who was asked to fetch coffee, a problem solver who was told her solutions were above her pay grade. Scattered laughter rippled through the audience. But invisibility, as it turns out, has its advantages. While everyone else was focused on looking important, I was watching, learning, and preparing for the moment when competence would matter more than perception. I clicked to my first slide, the Morrison & Associates financial chart showing our growth trajectory. This is what happens when you stop assuming and start recognizing talent where it actually exists. The next slide showed our veteran hiring statistics. Over 40% of our senior staff were now military veterans. This is what happens when you value substance over style, results over relationships, and capability over credentials. The applause began building. And this, I said, clicking to a final slide showing our client satisfaction ratings and industry rankings, is what happens when you realize that the person you dismissed as just another woman in the office might be exactly who you need to lead you into the future. The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. As I walked off stage, I spotted a familiar face in the audience. Derek Thompson, now working for a much smaller firm, looking older and humbler than the arrogant executive I'd once fetched coffee for. Our eyes met briefly. He nodded once, not friendly, but respectful. Progress. Morrison announced his retirement at our 5th annual company meeting. As he prepared to hand over CEO responsibilities, he called me to the stage one final time. "When I started this company 30 years ago," he said, his voice carrying across the packed auditorium, "I thought success meant finding the smartest people and giving them authority to lead." He paused, looking directly at me. I was half right. Success means recognizing the smartest people, regardless of what they look like, where they came from, or whether they fit your preconceived notions of leadership. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Sarah Mitchell didn't just save our company. She transformed our entire understanding of what leadership looks like. She showed us that real strength isn't about commanding attention. It's about earning respect through competence, integrity, and results. He handed me the ceremonial key to the executive suite. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present your new CEO, Sarah Mitchell." The applause was deafening, but what moved me most were the faces in the audience. Maria Santos, tears streaming down her cheeks. James Park, beaming with pride. Kevin Chen from IT, who had become one of my strongest allies. And scattered throughout the crowd, dozens of other veterans who had joined our company through the Veterans Leadership Initiative. Former soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, who had found their second careers in an environment that valued their unique skills and perspectives. If this story gave you hope that your skills will be recognized, write "My time is now" in the comments, because it absolutely is. Today, Morrison & Associates is the largest veteran-owned defense consulting firm in the United States. We've trained over 200 military veterans for successful corporate careers. Our security protocols are now industry standard. Our success has been featured in Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and Military Leadership Quarterly. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my office late at night, I think about that rainy Thursday when Derek's phone buzzed and everything changed. I think about all the other invisible women and men in offices around the world, people with incredible skills and experience who are dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated because they don't fit someone else's narrow definition of success. I think about the moment when Morrison looked at me and said, "I only trust her." Not because I was the loudest voice in the room, or the most connected, or the one with the most impressive credentials on paper, but because when crisis hit, I was the one who had been prepared. I was the one who had the answers. I was the one who could deliver. They laughed when they called me the coffee girl. They're not laughing anymore. Because the truth is, real leaders aren't born in boardrooms or business schools. They're forged in moments of crisis, when everything is on the line and someone has to step up and solve the problem. Sometimes that someone is exactly the person you least expect. Sometimes that someone is the woman you've been ignoring all along. And sometimes, just sometimes, the final revelation is that the person you dismissed as powerless was actually the most powerful person in the room. The only question is, are you ready to recognize them before it's too late?